Every day, hundreds of thousands of people vanish across the globe. While many are quickly located or return on their own, about 1/3 are eventually found deceased. The rest vanish without a trace, their destinies clouded in mystery. These unsolved disappearances often intrigue the public, inspiring detective stories or fantasy films. Yet, at times, reality proves to be far more frightening than fiction. The case of 19-year-old student Katie Poor is particularly exceptional. Her disappearance was so perplexing that even NASA specialists joined in the search efforts. Despite their thorough attempts, she was never found alive. This tragic event profoundly impacted the nation, especially the usually tranquil town of Moose Lake, where Katie lived with other students. Katie Elizabeth Puya was born on February 28, 1980, in the charming town of Duluth, located in St. Louis County, Minnesota. She was the second child in a loving, typical family. She grew up alongside her older brother, with whom she shared a close bond from childhood. When Katie began school, her family moved to Carleton County and made their home in Barnum. Katie was known for her sociable nature, active lifestyle, and remarkable creativity. She studied vocals, played guitar, and eventually began performing in a music band where she happily showcased her talents. Katie also had a deep love for animals. She volunteered at a shelter for stray cats and dogs and participated actively in cleaning and beautifying local parks. Her beauty was well recognized. In high school, she even participated in a city beauty contest where she achieved second place. After high school graduation, she attended college and moved to Moose Lake, a quiet and picturesque town in the same county as her family. By that time, Katie had been dating Mark for a couple of years. They both went to university and planned to get married. The couple rented a small but cozy apartment in a good neighborhood. Katie attended law school to study criminal law, while her fiancé focused on computer technology. They both worked part-time jobs to support themselves financially, save for their wedding, and avoid relying on their parents. Katie secured a job at a gas station near a busy highway where she took night shifts several times a week. She enjoyed this work because it allowed her to manage her schedule efficiently. However, her parents were concerned about her safety since she was alone at the shop during nighttime along the highway, connecting several large cities. A place bustling with traffic around the clock with various people visiting the gas station and store. Despite their concerns, Katie reassured them that there was no need for worry due to surveillance cameras everywhere and the presence of a nearby popular diner that remained crowded most of the time. On May 26, 1999, 19-year-old Katie Puya went to the store for her regular shift. It appeared to be an ordinary day. She switched with her colleague who had worked during the day and took up her position behind the cash register. Around midnight, a woman came by the gas station, filled her tank with gasoline, and walked into the store to pay and buy some snacks. After gathering her items, she approached the cash register but found it unattended. Confused, she waited for a while, then went to the utility room and called out. There was no answer. This felt strange since the store was fully operational. Lights on, doors unlocked. When no clerk appeared after 10 minutes, she decided to contact the police. Police arrived promptly, examined the store and its surroundings, but found nothing unusual or alarming. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood traces. Everything was in place, including a good amount of money in the cash register. Robbery was ruled out immediately. Initially, it was assumed that Katie might have left voluntarily due to an urgent matter. However, all her personal belongings were still in the store. Keys to her house and car included. Her vehicle was parked outside. This posed a question. How did Katie leave? On foot. Abandoning her car and purse seemed unlikely, pointing towards a more troubling scenario. The police reached out to Katie's parents to report her disappearance and inquire if they had any clues about her whereabouts or any reasons she might have abruptly left. Mr. and Mrs. Puya assured them that Katie was always responsible and would not abandon her duties as she highly valued her job. Katie's fiancé corroborated their statements, expressing his utter confusion regarding her sudden disappearance. At this point, Katie Puya was officially reported missing and the store treated as a potential crime scene. The investigation kicked off with a review of footage from 4 surveillance cameras installed in the store, each one positioned strategically to cover every angle inside. The initial hours of Katie's shift revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing suspicious occurred during those early hours. Around 11 p.m., a girl walked into the store. She chatted with Katie for about 10 minutes but didn't purchase anything. From their conversation, it was clear that she was either an acquaintance or friend of the missing student. Approximately half an hour later, A entered the store. He looked around but quickly left. Shortly after, he came back in. At the moment, Katie had gone to the back room and it seemed he might have been observing her from outside through the glass door. He re-entered the store and headed directly towards the back room. Unfortunately, there were no cameras in that section of the store, so what happened next is unclear. A few minutes later, Katie and this unknown man emerged from the back room together and moved toward the exit. The man was walking behind Katie, holding her by the hair with one hand and pressing his other hand against her back. It was evident that he was threatening her with a weapon, likely a knife or gun, and forcing her to leave with him. Essentially, this constituted an abduction from her workplace. This information was crucial. However, further investigation faced challenges because there were no cameras at the gas station adjacent to the store or in its parking lot. Consequently, determining where the suspect took Katie, his vehicle details, and his direction of travel was impossible. Given that the gas station and store were situated on an isolated stretch near a busy highway with no places to hide or go except along the road, it's likely someone would have seen if he had forcefully led her away on foot and contacted law enforcement. Therefore, it's presumed that he took her to the parking lot and placed her in his car. Another problem arose from the poor quality of the video footage from existing cameras. It was 1999 after all, and having any cameras at all back then was quite fortunate. The videos were grainy black and white images that rendered identifying features unclear, making it difficult to create a facial composite swiftly. Law enforcement and volunteers who joined the search scoured several miles around the gas station and store looking for possible clues, but found nothing conclusive. Investigators also interviewed Melinda, the sole witness who spoke with Katie shortly before she vanished. Melinda confirmed she was a close friend and fellow student working part-time at a nearby diner. She mentioned seeing a suspicious man harassing both a customer inside the diner and another woman in the parking lot earlier on. Suggesting to each woman that they should get better acquainted, both declined his suggestions and walked away separately. Melinda's work shift ended at 11 p.m. As she locked the door and prepared to go home, a man showed up again. He approached, asking if the restaurant was closing and what time it would open in the morning. Melinda found his question odd and hurried to inform Katie about the visitor, suggesting they call the police. Katie, however, reassured her that everything was fine since the store had plenty of cameras. Melinda then remembered the man drove a black Ford F-150 pickup truck. They left the parking lot around the same time, but he overtook her quickly. She recalled part of his license plate, 557, and the letter Y. This was an important clue, but in the late 90s, without a national electronic database, locating the vehicle took time. Both Melinda and another witness at a gas station provided only rough descriptions of the suspect. Given it was dark outside, they couldn't get a clear look at him. They described him as a white male with long blonde hair, aged between 35–40. He spoke without an accent and wore a baseball cap that partially hid his face. The surveillance videos were not much help either due to low resolution. For the first time, police sought help from NASA specialists to enhance image quality and reveal more details of the suspect's face. Using advanced technology meant for astronomical purposes, they reconstructed a clearer image of him. The task was complicated, strange angles, as he never looked directly at any camera in the footage. Still, authorities were satisfied with the final composite portrait. This portrait was distributed to police stations statewide and frequently shown on news channels. Citizens were urged to stay vigilant and report any sightings of individuals matching this description or driving a similar vehicle. Soon after, police began receiving dozens of calls daily, though most turned out to be false leads. About a couple of days later, authorities detained a 25-year-old man who bore a strong resemblance to the individual the composite portrait. Additionally, he had a prior criminal record for robbery and harassment. However, He was soon released due to a notable distinguishing feature: a large tattoo covering his entire arm, which the suspect in the video did not have. An important detail was that the man who escorted Katie out of the store wore a Yankee baseball team t-shirt with the number 23. According to Melinda, when the suspect approached her in the parking lot, he was dressed differently. Yet, upon reviewing the surveillance footage, she had no doubt it was him. A week later, a call came from Minneapolis. A worried man reported that the person in the portrait looked like his neighbor, who worked as a cleaner and drove a similar car. A couple of weeks ago, right around the time of the girl's abduction, this neighbor unexpectedly cut his long blonde hair and began growing a beard. This suspect turned out to be 50-year-old Donald Hutchinson. It was discovered that he had recently quit his job without any apparent reason, which raised suspicions. On the day of Katie's disappearance and the following day, he didn't go to work because he reported not feeling well. Former colleagues confirmed that he drove a black Ford F-150 with a license plate matching what police were looking for. Donald Aubin Hutchinson's real name is Donald Allen Blom. He was born in Minnesota in 1949 and grew up in a dysfunctional family where his father was an alcoholic who abused both him and his mother. As a teenager, Donald himself started drinking and displayed uncontrollable aggressive behavior that troubled everyone around him. Consequently, he was transferred to a special school for difficult children. At age 25, Blom was convicted and imprisoned after kidnapping and assaulting a 14-year-old girl. However, he served only 3 years before being released on parole. Shortly after, he was arrested again for assault and harassment, but received another short sentence. In 1983, Donald was arrested yet again. This time, he had kidnapped 2 teenage girls, taken them to a deserted area, and tied them to a tree. He assaulted one of the girls and strangled the other several times, then revived her, making it a game of life and death. Fortunately, a passerby walking with a dog heard their screams and saved them. Consequently, Blom served 9 years in prison. Upon his release, he changed his name, moved to another city, and avoided police attention for a long time. He got married after his release and his wife bore him 4 children. On the surface, their family appeared happy. The man secured employment. However, his addiction to alcohol and substances turned him into a menace. His wife and children often suffered from his violence, but occasionally this monster sought other victims. Nobody was aware of Donald's criminal past. He went to great lengths to conceal it by changing his name and identity. He even altered his appearance by growing long hair and a beard that he sometimes shaved off. Initially, the police lacked solid grounds to detain him. They could only question him during their investigation. The suspect owned around 20 acres of land just 12 miles from the store where Katie was kidnapped. In fact, right after Katie's disappearance, the police had already visited him upon learning about his black pickup truck. Donald claimed that he had sold the vehicle and that its license plate differed from the one they sought. He even provided a document as proof, which later turned out to be fake. Following these findings, the police secured a search warrant for his house and land property. They discovered an unexpected surprise in a large barn, where Donald attempted to hide his black Ford F-150 behind old junk and furniture. The license plate matched the one identified by Melinda. With this discovery, Donald's calm facade began to crack. Nonetheless, he continued denying any involvement in Katie's disappearance. Yet even with this significant lead, the pickup truck, there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him at that point. The suspect's license plate was only a partial match, and there were neither witnesses nor video evidence confirming that Katie had been taken in that specific car. Consequently, the police shifted their focus to searching the house, aiming to find traces of the missing girl or even Katie herself. The interior was spotless. No blood traces, no signs of forcible confinement, and no clues linked to Katie's disappearance were found. However, inspecting the property posed challenges as it spanned over 24 acres and required more than a day's effort along with significant resources. To address this, National Guard personnel and hundreds of volunteers joined in the search and investigation efforts. The first day yielded no results. By the end of the second day, however, police stumbled upon peculiar ashes, suggesting that something had been burned or cremated over an extended period. Among these ashes were bone fragments, which criminologists meticulously collected and sent to a laboratory for analysis. While most bones were animal remains, parts of a human skeleton were also discovered, including a tooth that warranted closer examination. Experts identified that the bones belonged to a young woman aged between 18 and 23 years old. However, DNA testing faced complications because prolonged exposure to high temperatures had destroyed much of the material. When criminologists from other states joined the investigation, they managed to extract a DNA fragment matching the DNA of the missing girl. Unfortunately, this crucial evidence was deemed only indirect and could not conclusively establish the suspect's guilt. Hence, it became imperative to analyze the tooth found among the ashes to determine if it belonged to Katie. It was revealed that this tooth contained a rare filling made of silicone and zirconium, an innovative dental material. Conversations with Katie's dentist confirmed this unusual filling. He immediately recognized his work since he had used materials obtained from an international dental conference on her just a week before she vanished. Though all collected evidence remained circumstantial collectively, a combination strong enough, it sufficed for law enforcement officials to arrest Donald and detain him until trial proceedings concluded. Thus unfolded developments leading up to his incarceration, pending further proceedings. On June 22, 1999, the man immediately pleaded not guilty, sought legal counsel, and expressed his willingness to cooperate with the investigation, prove his innocence. During a more thorough examination of his belongings, law enforcement discovered multiple firearms for which he lacked permits. Shortly thereafter, Donald began confessing. He admitted to kidnapping Katie from the store, bringing her to his property where he strangled her, and subsequently burning her body. However, he denied any coercion related to intimacy with the victim, attributing his inability to do so to the significant amount of alcohol and illegal substances he had consumed. Donald further claimed that he used only firewood and paper to incinerate the remains, but experts asserted that this method alone wouldn't suffice without additional fuel. That evening was marked by aimless driving around the neighborhood. Upon noticing Melinda at a gas station, Donald initially intended to follow her when she left but then changed his mind. He overtook her and proceeded home to change clothes before heading back to the store where Katie worked. This accounts for discrepancies in eyewitness testimony regarding what he was wearing. 2 weeks later, Donald unexpectedly recanted his confession, asserting his innocence once again. He alleged that he had been coerced into confessing due to threats made against him and his wife. His wife attempted to support this claim during the trial by offering an alibi, asserting that he was at home with her throughout that evening and did not leave the residence. In a striking turn of events during the trial, 2 former victims from 1983 came forward. They testified about their experiences with Donald, depicting him as a ruthless sadist who had subjected them to torture and exploitation. The evidence presented along with the witness statements led the jury to unanimously declare the defendant guilty, sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of. Subsequently, Donald's wife admitted she lived in fear of her husband, habitually beat her and their children. She expressed that she felt compelled to provide him with an alibi out of fear for her own safety. After disclosing, she changed her last name, took their children, and moved to another state where they wouldn't be known. On a related note, detectives working on this high-profile case suspected that Blom could be a serial rapist and murderer. They linked him to several unsolved crimes involving the disappearance of young girls under similar circumstances. Specifically, he was suspected in the strangling of Wilma Johnson found in 1983, as well as the 1993 abduction and murder of student Holly Spangler. In 2021, Blom was transferred to a medium security prison at MCF Faribault. Conditions there were much more lenient, and he referred to it as a vacation. However, after complaints and protests from Katie's family, Blom was moved back to a high-security facility in Stillwater, Minnesota. He passed away there on January 10, 2023, at age 73. Katie Pyer's death has been covered extensively in popular television documentaries about real crimes. HLN Channel aired a series called Forensic Files, which featured an episode titled Tooth or Consequences, based on Katie's story. The Discovery Channel released an episode from their series New Detectives titled Fatal Abduction, dedicated to this particular case. Additionally, in 2010, a documentary titled From the Ashes was produced using materials from the investigation. On March 20th, 2020, in the city of Alua, Portugal, 20-year-old Diogo Gonçalves went to meet a girl he admired deeply. Unfortunately, he couldn't have predicted how this seemingly romantic evening would end. The scenic resort town of Albufeira, renowned as one of the top destinations in the Algarve region of southern Portugal, was where Diogo was born in 1999. As an only child in a modest yet hardworking family reliant on the fluctuations of tourism, Diogo was seen by his parents as a model son. Those who knew him described him as decent, responsible, hardworking, and dependable. He was also a sociable young man who valued time spent with friends and family. Diogo completed his high school education in his hometown and later pursued a degree in computer science. To help fund his studies and contribute to the family's expenses, he began working at McDonald's at the age of 16 in 2015. By 17, still employed with the company, Diogo's life took a devastating and unexpected turn. His father suffered a stroke, leaving him in a vegetative state. The media closely covered the event, and just as Diogo and his mother were coping with this hardship, another tragedy struck. On her way to work at the mall where she was employed as a cleaner, Diogo's mother was struck by a vehicle. The car dragged her several meters before she fell into a ditch, and despite efforts to save her, she tragically died from her injuries. Although the driver initially fled the scene, law enforcement managed to identify and bring him to justice. While awaiting legal proceedings against those responsible for both his parents' dire situations, it became necessary for Diogo's father to be placed in a specialized medical facility for appropriate care. His maternal aunt, concerned about his precarious circumstances, invited him to stay with her. However, due to irreconcilable differences that emerged after weeks together, cohabitation proved unfeasible. Subsequently confiding in a friend about these challenges led to an offer from his friend's parents. They provided him accommodation within their residence located in a Luz Algarve neighborhood. This proximity alleviated some distress for Diogo, as living amongst familiar faces brought some semblance of comfort during such trying times. Despite being quite young, Diogo showcased remarkable skill in handling challenging situations through patience and optimism. At 18, he completed his degree in computer technology in 2017 and secured a 6-month internship at Vila Vida Park, a renowned 5-star tourist hotel. His performance there was noteworthy, leading the executives to offer him a technician role. In 2018, Diogo decided to accept this position, resigning from his job at a fast food restaurant chain where he had worked for nearly a year and attained the role of duty manager. He embarked on a new chapter of his life, anticipating numerous opportunities that would aid his progress after the difficulties he had faced. As Diogo began to settle into his new job and look towards a brighter future, he decided to purchase a car. He formed good relationships with colleagues, including Maria Malva, a 19-year-old security guard at the hotel, who particularly caught his attention. Like Diogo, Maria also came from humble beginnings and had encountered significant challenges. Her mother struggled with mental health issues. While her father abandoned the family early on, she never reconnected with him. Maria was passionate about martial arts and practiced karate. While she aspired to become a police officer, her application was rejected due to her tattoo. This setback led her to enroll in training at a security company specializing in various private security sectors. Diogo openly expressed his admiration for Maria from the start, but she did not reciprocate his feelings and was rather aloof towards him. Fabio Acosta, a close friend of Diogo's, mentioned that Diogo was infatuated with Maria. According to Fabio, Diogo's dedication to her was intense enough that he declined an attractive job offer from the Sheraton hotel chain in Lisbon because he did not wish to be separated from her. Additionally, when Maria was working her shift, Diogo often brought meals for her. As time went on, they became almost inseparable observers, frequently assumed they were a couple despite there being no romantic relationship between them. Maria confided in Diogo that she wanted no romantic involvement, as she had recently ended relationship with a naval officer, but simultaneously gave him mixed signals. Despite this ambiguity, Diogo never abandoned hope for a future with her and continuously sought ways to be near her and show his affection through various gestures aimed at pleasing her. One day, Diogo was deeply disappointed when he stumbled upon a video on social media showing Maria kissing another girl on the lips. He felt upset because he believed she should have informed him that she did not like men, and that this was why they would never be together. Fabio, Diogo's best friend, attempted to calm him by explaining that girls sometimes do this, but Diogo remained unconvinced. He insisted that she had misled him and that this was why she had rejected his romantic advances. Despite this disappointment, Diogo and Maria stayed friends. She continued to accept his gifts and invitations for dates. Many times, Diogo offered to walk her home, but she always mentioned that her roommate had a jealous boyfriend and did not want another man entering her apartment. Time went by, and in December 2019, Diogo learned he would finally receive compensation for his mother's death, which happened 3 years prior. After receiving the amount of 70,000 euros, he decided it was time to purchase a house, so he wouldn't need to keep paying rent. Diogo then shared this exciting news with his friend Maria. Shortly thereafter, Maria resigned from her job at the hotel. She said she could no longer tolerate her co-workers' comments about the supposed relationship between her and Diogo. Additionally, she explained that she wanted more time with her mother, who required significant attention due to a mental illness. Initially, there was no reason to doubt her explanations. However, subsequent events hinted that her decision to quit might have been driven by more sinister motives. This is where Mariana Fona comes into play, a 20-year-old nurse at the hospital who had a stable relationship with Maria. The two young women lived together in Mariana's parents' home, since they were not financially secure enough to live independently and enjoy their relationship fully. Maria found herself in this situation when she learned about the significant sum of money Diogo would receive. Interestingly, from that point onward, Maria started drawing closer to Diogo. It appears likely that Maria shared this information with Mariana together. They plotted to deceive him and gain access to his bank account details with the intention of stealing his compensation money. One day, after Diogo had repeatedly refused, Maria informed the young man that she wished to spend a romantic evening with him. This proposal was a surprising gift for the 20-year-old, who found it hard to believe his ears. After waiting for so long, the idea of being close to the girl he loved made him ecstatic. Their rendezvous was scheduled for Friday evening, March 20th, 2020. Diogo was elated and had no doubts about what might have led Maria to change her mind so abruptly. Although Maria and Mariana shared different accounts of what transpired that day, the following details are based on media reports and official information. Upon Diogo's arrival, Mariana offered him orange juice that she had brought herself. Unbeknownst to him, the drink contained a hidden ingredient, 3 ampoules of DIM, a central nervous system drug with anesthetic and sedative effects. Mariana reportedly proposed using this substance, which she had stolen from the hospital where she worked. The girl's plan entailed sedating Diogo to access his banking information and manipulate his fingers to unlock his phone. Mariana allegedly waited in a car outside while her friend executed their plan. She sent multiple texts to Maria, checking if the drug had taken effect since it was acting slower than anticipated. Inside, tensions rose as Diogo grew increasingly unnerved, without understanding what was happening. Attempting to calm him, Maria promised an erotic dance, but insisted on tying him to a table first. After several minutes in this restrained position, Diogo panicked and pleaded with Maria to release him. Her demeanor turned aggressive as they began to struggle. Using her martial arts skills, she overpowered Diogo, bringing him down and restraining his neck with her arms, yet cutting off his air supply. According to Mariana's account, Maria eventually summoned her into the apartment. Mariana found Diogo on the floor and questioned Maria about deviating from their original plan, merely stealing his keys and taking his money. Upon discovering that Diogo was unresponsive, the nurse administered resuscitative measures. Upon awakening in a highly agitated state, he attempted to attack Mariana. Perhaps recognizing another conspirator against him, he tried defending himself. Reacting to Diogo's aggressive response towards her friend, Maria intervened by grabbing him from behind once more, bringing him down and constricting his neck again. In light of these events, both women's actions have been scrutinized as part of ongoing investigations rooted in available evidence and testimonies provided by those involved. Diogo's life tragically ended at the hands of the girl he loved. His body lay in the living room of Maria and Mariana's house, where they immediately set about their planned robbery. They first cut off his thumb and index finger to unlock his phone, access a mobile payment app, and transfer money. This process took several days due to a daily transaction limit. The crime occurred just as NYADA 19 restrictions began, with remote working becoming commonplace. Diogo was supposed to go to work the next day. The girls attempted to prevent his co-workers from noticing his absence and raising concerns. They sent a message from Diogo's phone to an IT colleague, stating Diogo could not go to work and needed a replacement. This message raised suspicion because Diogo wasn't known for making such requests at short notice. When asked if everything was all right, Diogo's phone responded affirmatively. Conversations between this hotel employee and others continued through Friday into part of Saturday, but the messages increasingly seemed uncharacteristic of Diogo. One of these messages reached Diogo's supervisor, stating Diogo wouldn't return to work as he had met a woman from France and would be moving in with her. This struck the boss as odd since Diogo was known for his reliability and wouldn't abruptly leave his job. Seeking clarification, the supervisor tried calling Diogo, but received no answer. Another message claimed Diogo wasn't in a condition for phone calls. The supervisor responded that hearing directly from Diogo would be reassuring. The reactions from Diogo's loved ones to these impersonated messages led Maria and Mariana to adjust their strategy regarding his disappearance. They decided to fabricate a scenario suggesting that Diogo had taken his own life and then plotted to dismember his remains for disposal. Maria later confessed their plan was inspired by the TV series Dexter, which depicts a forensic expert who eliminates criminals while erasing traces of his crimes by dismembering victims. These actions highlight how communication breakdowns and erratic behaviors can raise suspicions and lead authorities closer to uncovering criminal deeds, even when efforts are made to mislead those searching for answers. After executing their reprehensible plan, they placed Diogo's body in trash bags, storing them in the trunk of their vehicle. They then proceeded to an ATM and a shopping mall. Security cameras captured them hugging and laughing. Upon returning to their residence, they began the gruesome task of dismembering body. Diogo's torso was eventually placed in a black bag, with the remaining parts disposed of in a container. During these events at Mariana's parental home, Diogo's friends initiated a campaign to report him missing and contacted the authorities. The authorities waited the mandatory 48 hours before officially declaring him missing. Subsequently, the girls departed from the house. Maria drove Diogo's car towards the cliff near Cabo de San Vicente Lighthouse, with Mariana following in her own car. At approximately 2 p.m., Mariana discarded Diogo's torso off the cliff, abandoning his car nearby to create an impression that Diogo had ended his own life. Unfortunately for them, Maria did not anticipate that instead of falling into the sea, the remains would become lodged on a rock. The girls then departed together in Mariana's car. They drove approximately 7 kilometers to the Pago do Inferno waterfall in Tavira, where they disposed of what remained of Diogo into the water. Shortly after this incident, Diogo's vehicle was discovered in a parking lot near Cabo de San Vicente Lighthouse. Reports indicated that 2 laptops were found within the car. Forensic police arrived promptly and conducted thorough land and sea searches. This led to the discovery of a young man's torso, partially enveloped by a black garbage bag near one location along the coast. Simultaneously, at another coastal site, Pago do Inferno, a French couple made a horrifying discovery. Diogo's head. After extensive efforts from law enforcement officers, his hands and feet were also recovered. The investigators handling this case found several aspects puzzling, considering that Diogo appeared to be an unassuming individual who avoided unsavory company based on collected data about him. Further probing by authorities revealed that Diogo had received significant compensation following his mother's death. They uncovered substantial transfers from Diogo's account to Maria's account through monetary transactions. tracking methodically carried out by investigators. The detective's next step was to locate Maria and clarify why Diogo's funds ended up with her. The girl then attempted to persuade the police that she had killed the young man because he was attempting to abuse her. She asserted this as the reason she left the hotel before the incident. However, an examination of the text messages between the victim and Maria revealed that this was not true. She and Diogo had grown closer after Maria stopped working. During her first interaction with the officers, Maria claims sole responsibility for planning and executing the actions leading to the fatal shooting. She emphasized that Mariana had no involvement in the crime. However, Mariana's account contradicted Maria's claims. The nurse stated that Maria confided in her a plan to steal Diogo's money, but intended to take his life as well. She wanted him to suffer enough to disclose his bank account password. The collected evidence proved sufficient for convicting both girls. Investigators had phone records, the deceased's cell phone, and ATM surveillance footage at their disposal. Maria and Mariana were arrested on April 1, 2020, and appeared in court in June of that year. The judge meticulously followed Maria's recounting of events, where she insisted on pleading guilty and denied any involvement of Mariana. According to her version, Diogo's body remained for 2 days in a car parked in a garage, and it was there that his remains were dismembered when Mariana's family slept. After hearing Mariana's detailed account of events, the judge repeatedly asked about her whereabouts during the dismemberment executed with surgical precision at the joints. The courtroom's attention turned towards Mariana. She anticipated these questions and stated that since everyone knew she worked at a hospital, they assumed she dismembered the corpse herself. To clarify matters further, she suggested using internet resources for verification. Given the seriousness of this cold, calculated, reckless, and brutal crime, both individuals received custodial sentences, as determined by the judge. A few months later, on February 24, 2021, the trial began. During her testimony on February 26, 2021, Maria confirmed that she initially wanted revenge on Diogo for the alleged attempted violence, but stated she did not intend to take his life. The defendant admitted her intent was to humiliate the victim and verified that her friend had no relationship with the young man and was unaware of the alleged attempted violence. Maria also asserted that her actions were not motivated by compensation. The girls appeared in court together, however. They did not look at each other throughout the trial. Rumor suggests that after their arrest and subsequent jail time, they decided to end their relationship. The trial included testimony from several witnesses, including forensic expert Teresa Costa. The expert explained that the amount of dipim found in Diogo's blood was significantly less than expected from 3 ampoules, suggesting either Diogo had not taken the prescribed dose or had ingested it many hours before his death. On April 27, 2021, the court issued its decision. Maria was found guilty of aggravated murder, accessory to desecration of a body, robbery, unlawful access, and fraud. Additionally, she was convicted of carjacking and possession of an illegal weapon. She received a sentence of 25 years in prison and was ordered to pay Diogo's father €265,000 in compensation. Mariana was acquitted of murder but found guilty of desecrating a corpse and complicity in fraud. For this, she received a sentence of 4 years in prison. She was released because none of the offenses involved pretrial detention until final sentencing. The court concluded that Mariana's attempt to revive Diogo demonstrated she did not intend to kill him. In reaching this decision, the judge took into account Mariana's confession where she expressed full responsibility for her actions. However, this verdict was not well received by the Portuguese public, who viewed Mariana as equally culpable in the heinous crime against Diogo as Maria. Following the verdict, Mariana exited through the back door where her father, present at all hearings, awaited her. Both refrained from making any statements to reporters. 26-year-old Wanda Jean Mays lived in Huntsville, Alabama, and worked as a secretary at the United States Army's Redstone Arsenal. She was an active member of her church and had a close-knit family. Those who knew her described her as quiet, yet very kind. Wanda struggled with what her family referred to as a chemical imbalance, which required medical attention. She experienced intense, though sporadic, panic attacks. For the most part, people outside her family, including her roommate, were unaware of her ongoing struggles. However, in May of 1986, Wanda's mental health began to worsen. Her father believed the decline was linked to Wanda's decision to start dieting. On May 11, 1986, Wanda had dinner with her parents. On her way back to Huntsville, she stopped at the lakeside home of her aunt and uncle, Betty and Ty Dorman, located in the Warrington community near Guntersville. They persuaded her to stay the night, assuring her they would wake her early enough for work the next morning. At 5 a.m. on May 12th, Betty went to wake Wanda, but the door was locked, and there was no response when she called her name. Betty and Ty couldn't open the door, so they had to ask their grandson to break it down to get inside. The double-paned window in the bedroom had been broken from the inside despite no one in the house hearing it shatter during the night. The bed had not been slept in, and Wanda's clothes were neatly folded on the nightstand. On the dock on the lake behind the house, the family discovered Wanda's torn and bloodied nightgown. Fearing that Wanda may have drowned, search drivers were deployed in the lake, which was also dragged. The effort did not find Wanda, but did come across a canoe floating in the lake with more blood inside of it. The blood type was consistent with Wanda's. Witnesses came forward with 2 potential sightings of Wanda shortly after she went missing. A witness claimed to have seen a woman matching Wanda's description walking along Alabama Route 62 wearing oversized clothing and with wet hair. Another witness claimed to see a woman who looked like Wanda in the back seat of a car in the parking lot of a convenience store in Huntsville. The woman was with 2 men and appeared to be afraid of them. When the witness came out of the store a short time later, the woman was talking on a payphone with one of the men standing with her. Despite the extensive search and leads from witnesses, Wanda's disappearance would remain unsolved for almost 22 years. On January 23, 2008, Marshall County Sheriff Scott Walls announced that Wanda's remains had been located and identified. In 2003, a hunter had come across skeletal remains in a remote part of Georgia Mountain off of Chalakee Road in Guntersville, 1.8 miles from Betty and Ty Dorman's home. The remains were examined by both the FBI and the University of Tennessee's Department of Forensic Anthropology to conclusively identify them as Wanda and determine her cause of death. According to the examination, Wanda died after falling 150 feet from the cliff. Her remains were discovered below. The sheriff's office ruled her death an accident and announced that there were no indications of foul play. As best as they can determine, Wanda had a panic attack while at her aunt and uncle's home. It was intense enough that she broke through the window and went running out into the night, taking the canoe across a small portion of the lake before continuing to run. In the dark, she wasn't able to see the cliff and ran off of it on accident. Wanda's family accepts the sheriff's office account of what happened to Wanda. After more than 2 decades, they finally were able to give her a proper memorial service and burial. In February 2002, Lee and Brenda Heist of Lititz, Pennsylvania were in the middle of a divorce. While Brenda had a job as a bookkeeper at a car dealership, she had not yet found a new place to live. She dropped off her 12-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter at school on February 8th, but was not home when they finished school. The children called their father at work, but he was not immediately concerned, assuming that Brenda was simply running late getting home. He had plans to go to a birthday party for his mother directly from work, but went home when his children called after dark saying their mother was still not home. Seeing nothing unusual at the house, Lee decided to wait until 8 o'clock to see if Brenda would come home. When she failed to, he called the police. Brenda's car was found in a nearby town 4 days later. It was parked near a bus station, but there were no records of Brenda buying a ticket there or at any other bus station or airport. An investigation was conducted by local, state, and federal authorities, but none of them uncovered solid leads to follow. Dozens of potential witnesses were interviewed. Lee Heist was considered a suspect in Brenda's disappearance due to their marriage falling apart, but he was eventually cleared. In 2010, he petitioned the Lancaster County courts to have Brenda declared legally dead so that his children could have some closure. On April 27, 2013, a woman walked into a police station in Key Largo, Florida. She said that she believed a warrant was out for her arrest for a probation violation in another county. While she was known to Florida law enforcement as Kelsey Smith, she told police that her real name was Brenda Heist. According to Brenda, on the morning of February 8, 2002, she had gone to a park after dropping off her children at school. While she had a job, her income was not enough to afford an apartment on her own. She had applied for financial assistance so that she and her children would have a place to live outside of the home her husband was getting in the divorce. She had just learned that her application had been denied. She sat in the park crying and was approached by two men and a woman who asked her what was wrong. They told her that they were about to hitchhike down to Florida. Brenda made a split-second decision to abandon her life and go with them. Brenda originally claimed to have been homeless for most of her 11 years in Florida, but that proved untrue. She had lived in a camper with a boyfriend for several years, working manual labor jobs that paid cash and did not require workers to provide identification. She eventually began cleaning houses and lived for almost a year in the home of one of her clients. While she was living there, she stole her employer's driver's license. She used that license at a traffic stop in February 2013, which led to an identity theft charge. This was a violation of her probation, which she was on for previous marijuana charges and traffic violations. It was this violation that led her to report to the police in April. She said that she finally decided to come clean about her identity because of her deteriorating health. Brenda's children were initially shocked to learn that their mother was alive, but that shock quickly turned to anger. After more than a decade of believing their mother was dead, they were understandably upset to learn that she had simply abandoned them. They did not wish to see her. At the time Brenda resurfaced, her daughter, Morgan, was attending college and working 3 jobs, and her son, Lee, had recently graduated college and was applying to the police academy. Brenda's ex-husband, Lee, had remarried and moved away from the home he had once shared with Brenda. Brenda was sentenced to 1 year in prison for her probation violation, but only served 6 months of that sentence due to good behavior and her participation in a work program. Brenda was released from the Santa Rosa County Jail on November 19, 2013, the day after her 54th birthday. She moved to Texas to stay with her mother and look into options of her mental health treatment. Crystal Leanne Anzaldi was born on October 10, 1989 in Hillsboro, Oregon, the second child of Dorothy and Jeff Anzaldi. When Jeff joined the Navy, the family relocated to San Diego, California. Without a lot of money, they eventually moved into the first floor of a house in the Golden Hill neighborhood. A friend of Dorothy's had told her that the house's owner was going into a rehabilitation center and needed someone to stay in the house to take care of it and watch after their 3 children. The family, lured by the promise of free rent, took the owner up on the offer, only later learning that he was going to prison and not rehab, and that the home had a reputation as a drug house. 6 weeks after the family moved into the house, on December 8, 1990, Jeff woke up in the bed the entire family shared at 7 a.m. and covered 14-month-old Crystal with a blanket. He then went back to sleep. When he woke up again an hour later, Crystal was no longer with him. The front door of the house, as well as a door to an upstairs apartment, were wide open. Crystal was nowhere to be found and the police were called. The entire neighborhood was searched and helicopters flew overhead announcing that a child was missing, but no sign of Crystal was found. In March of 1997, Marshal Chamblin Rosado of Puerto Rico called authorities to report that his wife had been abusing and neglecting his stepdaughter, Sonia. During the investigation into the allegations, authorities asked his wife, Nilsa Guzman, for her daughter's birth certificate. The document she provided was fraudulent. Sonia was placed in foster care, and in October, a blood test confirmed that she was not Guillermo Guzman's daughter. Turned to Interpol to help determine where Sonia had come from. Comparing her smile and a facial birthmark to photos of missing children, they realized that their Sonia was really Crystal Anzaldi. It is unknown exactly how Guillermo Guzman came to have Crystal. That is, if she herself abducted her or if there is another party involved. She did not know the Anzaldis, but did know people who were known to visit their house. She claims a friend had given her Crystal, telling her that the child's mother had died. She also said that she hadn't watched the news around the time she got the baby or learned that an area child was missing. She was married at the time to another man in the Navy who had been deployed abroad for some time. When he returned home in December 1990, his wife had a baby she claimed was her own, but she would not explain who the child's father was. Inferring that it was not him, he told her to go back to her native Puerto Rico and he filed for divorce. Guillermoine Guzman and Crystal flew to Puerto Rico on December 21, 1990. Guillermoine Guzman was only ever convicted of fraud for the fake birth certificate she provided to police. During the almost 8 years their daughter had been missing, Dorothy and Jeff Anzaldi had divorced. Dorothy was living in California, and Jeff was back in Oregon with their older daughter Kendra, as well as a second wife and their daughter. The divorce meant that Crystal could not simply be returned home. The matter of her custody had to be settled first and involved courts and agencies in both California and Puerto Rico. Jeff was ultimately awarded custody, and Crystal was brought to Oregon to live with him in February 1998. Crystal had a difficult time adjusting to life back in the United States, hoarding and hiding food because she was used to going without it, struggling in school because she was used to speaking Spanish, and having difficulty responding to the name Crystal rather than Sonia. As an adult, she made the conscious decision to try to forget her time in Puerto Rico. As of 2013, she was working as a caregiver in a retirement home. On September 29, 2006, detectives uncovered the body of a young woman in St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow, United Kingdom. What seemed like a single crime was just the beginning of a much larger investigation, eventually leading them to one of the country's most ruthless serial offenders. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland, as the youngest of 8 children in the family of Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. From an early age, Peter displayed a difficult personality, which led his parents to send him to a boarding school in 1953 when he was only 7. However, this did little to improve his behavior. He was later sent to a correctional facility. After completing his time there, Peter moved to Brighton, England, where he began a relationship with Margaret Mount, a 17-year-old typist who was captivated by his personality. In August 1969, they married, but Peter soon revealed his cruel and controlling tendencies. He also became involved in criminal activities, leading to his conviction and imprisonment for theft and forgery a year later. As a result, Margaret divorced him in 1973. That same year, Peter married Sylvia Jeffrey, a local nurse who also succumbed to his charm. In 1973, they had their first son, Ian. Sadly, their daughter Claire passed away shortly after birth in 1974. Devastated by their loss and suffering from Peter's abusive behavior, Sylvia left him in 1976, taking their young son with her. In his 40s, Peter sought romance again, this time with Kathy Wilson, a 16-year-old at the time, vulnerable and impressionable, which made it easy for him. Together, they had a czar named Daniel, the couple's only child. They married in 1989 and moved to Scotland. Proved challenging. Kathy couldn't go outside freely due to her husband's control over every aspect of her life. His violent behavior continued, reaching significant levels. Consequently, isolation exacerbated her living conditions. The young woman mustered the courage and chose to flee with her son in the late 1990s. It's uncertain if Kathy's departure triggered the worst aspects of the man's character to emerge. However, from this moment on, Peter unleashed a terrible side of himself upon the world, ready to cause much harm. Unfortunately, his path intersected with that of a lovely girl named Vicky Hamilton. Vicky was born in Scotland in 1976. She was the second child of Michael and Janet Hamilton, a married couple who had previously welcomed their firstborn daughter Sharon. Later, Lee and Lindsay joined the family. Nevertheless, serious disagreements between the spouses led to divorce being the most appropriate decision. Vicky, Leah, and Lindsay stayed under their mother's care and moved to South London. The eldest daughter, Sharon, remained in Bathgate, BTHG, but this distance didn't hinder Vicky and Sharon from maintaining their close relationship. When Vicky turned 15, Sharon saw it as a good opportunity for her sister to take a step towards independence. a desire many teenagers have. After traveling alone by bus to Scotland for a weekend visit, Vicky was supposed to return home to her mother's house. It marked her first solo trip by bus. Sharon viewed it as a small yet significant adventure. On Saturday, February 9, 1991, the sisters went shopping and engaged in continuous conversation. Sunday was typical, except that Vicky felt apprehensive about her return trip. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. Vicky ensured she had enough money for the fare and reviewed the bus route one last time with her sister before they hugged each other tightly. Standing at the bus stop, snacking on a bag of chips across from the police station, it was there Vicky's path crossed with Peter's fatefully. He forcibly dragged her into his car and committed unspeakable acts, raping her and then taking her life, either out of malice or to prevent her from reporting him. Peter retained possession of the girl's purse. When Vicky did not arrive at her mother's house, and there was no communication from her, her family began searching for her frantically, in desperation. Simultaneously, they alerted the authorities about her absence. Once the police began investigating the disappearance, V's face became one of the most recognizable in Scotland. The search operation grew into one of the largest in the country's history. Amidst this uproar, Peter opted to relocate to southeast England, specifically to Margate, where he settled into a charming house with a garden. There, Peter brought Vicky's lifeless body. He wrapped her remains in plastic and concealed them beneath a layer of concrete. He then covered everything with soil. Neighbors thought he had dug a sandbox for his young son, who was 3 years old at the time. Peter's name never surfaced during the initial investigation into Vicky's disappearance. The police found no leads on Vicky's whereabouts and considered her a likely runaway, viewing her as an unhappy teenager due to her parents' divorce. Their theory of voluntary disappearance was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicky's purse was discovered near the main bus station in Edinburgh. Peter, always one step ahead of authorities, created this false lead and completely diverted the course of the investigation. Detectives spent 2 fruitless months searching in London. It is known that Vicky's mother died soon after. Over the next decade, Vicky's family and town residents continued to follow the case closely. But despite listing more than 7,000 names in the file, taking nearly 4,000 statements, and presenting about 500 documents along with 380 potential pieces of physical evidence, all efforts led to a dead end. The case was eventually shelved. The next young woman who encountered Peter was Dina McNichol from Essex. She had a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician, and her mother had tragically died many years prior in a car accident. By age 18, Dina was known as good-hearted and cheerful, a wonderful friend. She had just completed high school and held great hopes for her future. On one hand, possibly, she aimed to take a gap year for travel. On the other hand, she aspired to attend university. However, nothing was certain, because although Dina had applied to several institutions of higher education, she hadn't yet received any responses. During the first weekend of August 1991, Dina attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a young man named David between dances. They discovered they liked each other. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The following day, Dina assisted him in dismantling the tent, and they agreed to hitchhike back home separately. However, since part of their route was the same, they decided to hitchhike together. Tired but happy, the young couple hit the road to catch a ride. That's when Peter appeared and offered them a lift. David got out of the car first, and Dina wrote down his phone number before saying goodbye. Alone with the unknown driver, Dina was about to experience a real nightmare. On that same Monday, August 5th, 1991, Peter repeated his previous crime as with Vicky. He used Dina's scarf as a gag. After committing the crime, Peter withdrew money from Dina's account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When her relatives noticed someone withdrawing money from her account, they immediately suspected something was wrong. Her family knew how carefully she saved every penny and what she planned to use that money for, either traveling or continuing her education. Weeks went by with no word from Dina. The worst part for her family was living in uncertainty. Though unspoken aloud, Everyone was sure something terrible had happened. After all, if Dina were alive, she would have returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or explaining anything. Later, in 1993, he settled in Hampshire, specifically in a rented apartment in Leek Park. He argued that he wanted to be closer to his son. On August 4, 1993, two 14-year-olds went to visit a local woman, but found she wasn't home. They decided to ask other neighbors if they had seen her around instead. As a result, they knocked on Peter's door. The man saw a unique opportunity and invited them into his home to wait for the force they were looking for. They saw that the man's 5-year-old son was in there, mistook him for a friendly person, and agreed to enter. There is another version about the reasons for this meeting, which suggests it was not accidental. The two girls came to Peter's home in response to a request for a babysitter that the man had made. They trusted him because when they arrived, they saw his son and stayed to look after him. Everyone agrees that when the child fell asleep, Peter tied them up, threatened them with a knife, and forced them to drink alcohol. He then beat and raped them, injuring one of the girls. Just when they thought their lives would end at the hands of this extremely cruel man, a boy woke up. This saved them from suffering the same fatal fate that befell Vicky and Dina. In an effort to keep his son from realizing what had happened and understanding what kind of father he was, Peter decided to leave the apartment with the child. According to some reports, Peter left around 2 a.m., but before that, he turned on the gas in the kitchen, hoping to complete his monstrous task. However, the girls regained consciousness and managed to escape. They went to the police and reported all the abuses committed by Peter, whom they described in detail. Peter returned his child to his mother and joined a religious sect called the Communion of Jesus under a false name. He hoped to go unnoticed there. But in the meantime, media published his photograph provided by police, making his face widely known. Due to mass media coverage, information about this man started pouring in, and his car was also identified thanks to BBC Crime Watch program. He was located, and after 40 days on the run, he was captured in Brighton. He appeared in court on May 18, 1994, where he pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent acts against two young girls and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, Peter did not serve his full sentence and was released in 2014 at the age of 58. Immediately after his was released from prison, he went back to Scotland, aiming to relocate from the area where he was registered as a sex offender. For a while, he managed to stay off the radar until 6. Under a false name and posing as a homeless person, he knocked on the door of the Church of St. Patrick in Glasgow. To avoid getting exposed, he adopted the name Peter McLaughlin. Dennis and Katie Curran, a married couple from the church's charitable group, recall that evening vividly when a homeless man sought shelter. Despite his vulnerable appearance, Katie had an uneasy feeling about him. Peter was brought up as a Catholic and soon felt at ease in this church. His apparent begging served as an effective disguise because it only aroused sympathy from parishioners, with few paying much attention to him. Consequently, he roamed freely around the church, an ideal hiding place for him. However, his predatory instincts stayed intact. Being in a sacred place held no significance for him. Calculating every move meticulously, Peter displayed eagerness to assist in church repairs. After about 6 or 7 weeks, he asked the priest if he could join the maintenance staff. At that time, people facing financial difficulties often sought refuge in churches. It was through such circumstances that Angelica Clark crossed paths with Peter. Angelica was a 23-year-old woman from Poland who came to Scotland during the summer of 2006. She wanted to spend her summer break working to earn money and fund her language studies back home. She lived at the parish house of St. Patrick's Church, where she also worked as a cleaner. Peter took an immediate liking to her and somehow convinced her to help him with various tasks occasionally. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelica spent several hours assisting him in painting a shed. Some parishioners noticed them together before Peter attacked her at the back of the chapel. Licka Brown, 47, and her husband Andrew, 46, who lived in a multi-story house overlooking the church, heard a woman scream through their open windows. In her statement afterward, Leica described it as a brief scream that sounded like someone being forcibly restrained. It was so eerie that it compelled her to get up from the couch and approach the window, but she saw nothing. The scream heard by the Browns coincided with the moment when Peter caught the young girl off guard, as she stood her back to him. He struck her forcefully and dragged her to the back of the chapel, where he continued to beat her. After she lost consciousness, he raped her and then inflicted several knife wounds. He hid the body in the basement under the floor near the confessional. At this point, Angelica was still alive. Several hours passed, and parishioners began to notice that the young girl was missing. That's when Dennis informed his wife, Katie, about Angelica's unusual disappearance. The police quickly initiated an investigation and started interviewing members of the community one by one. During these interviews, it came to light that Peter was the last person seen with Angelica, albeit disguised as Pete, a homeless laborer. Eventually, he became the prime suspect. Officers went to question him, but found no evidence linking him directly to Angelica's disappearance, so they continued their investigation, aware that it was only a matter of time before they discovered the body and traced everything back to him. Peter fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation. He soon began to suspect that this case wasn't merely a disappearance. Based on their findings and collected testimonies, Detective Swindle believed it was unlikely Angelica would be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered her body in the chapel. This news shocked British society due to both the nature of the crime and the location chosen by the perpetrator for hiding the body. Examining the girl's injuries led Detective David to suspect that this wasn't Peter's first crime. However, he didn't yet know how horrific and dangerous this individual turned out to be. Further revelations were inevitable. DNA found at the crime scene and on Angelica matched data in the United Kingdom's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That's when they learned exactly who they were dealing with. A man whose actions indicated deep-seated brutality and criminal sophistication. The individual they were looking for turned out to be Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints had been discovered at the crime scene. Consequently, the first step for the authorities was to publish his photograph in the media. His image was distributed nationwide, and the Scottish police reached out to the Metropolitan Police, initiating a search across the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, in London, Peter attempted to conceal himself by going to a hospital and pretending he had heart problems. He claimed he had chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body. Identifying himself as a plumber named James Kelly, he was examined by Dr. Nick Lasso. However, something about his demeanor and behavior raised concerns for the doctor. Initially avoiding eye contact, a behavior atypical of most patients, Peter became suspicious when tests failed to reveal any clear physical cause for his alleged pain. The doctor's suspicions were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from a photograph that had been circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and doctor contacted the police. This phone call significantly altered the course of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken into a room so Alan could speak with him. Immediately following this encounter, Peter was arrested. Although initially only charged with violating the sex offender registry, this approach allowed officers time to build a criminal case against him. Under Detective David's leadership, evidence gathered led to Peter's trial for crimes against Angelica in late March 2007. Despite substantial evidence against him, Peter denied committing violent acts against her, claiming instead they engaged in consensual sexual activity. He also denied providing false information to police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of legal proceedings characterized by lies and manipulations on Peter's part, the truth finally prevailed. He was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment, but with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Detective David and his team were convinced that there was more to Peter's story. While the trial was ongoing, detectives delved into Peter's life. They gathered additional evidence and compiled a dossier. This was done with the involvement of various law enforcement agencies across the country. To avoid harming or interfering with Angelica's case, they preferred to conduct their work confidentially. The joint police operation was known as Anagram. Part of their work involved connecting missing persons cases to places where Peter had been. During these investigations, they established two precise links, one in Bathgate and another in Margate. Several weeks later, a search was conducted in Peter's old house on the coast. They found a knife with DNA samples hidden in the attic. However, there was nothing else there. Then they went to the house where Peter lived in Margate. There, it became clear they were dealing with a serious criminal offender. Investigators dug up a sandbox in the garden of the house, one that Peter had made for his son. And shockingly enough, they found a female body there. But that wasn't all. When they continued searching at the same location, they found another body. A woman's handbag was also discovered at the scene, which the team preserved for DNA analysis. Forensic experts worked diligently to establish the identities of the two victims, determine their ages, and estimate their dates of death. They also analyzed traces from the handbag. These genetic traces were very strong, but initially yielded no matches in the National DNA Database. However, on June 1, 2007, there was a crucial breakthrough. The DNA matched Peter's fingerprint. This development proved monumental for investigators who deemed it necessary to move forward decisively in this direction by November. On August 14, 2007, authorities confirmed that one of the bodies found belonged to Vicky Hamilton, who disappeared at 15 years old during her first independent. Her family had been waiting for answers for 16 years. Later, it was announced that the second body belonged to 18-year-old Dinah McNichol, who was hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1, 2008, the Royal Prosecution Service contacted Peter's lawyers and charged him with the murder of Vicky, leading to his trial. Officers had to restrain Vicky's father, Michael, after he saw Peter face to face. Michael later admitted he simply wanted Peter to know he was there to defend his daughter's name and protect her memory. After a month-long trial on December 2, 2008, Peter was found guilty of Vicky's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial for Dinah took place in December 2009. On December 16th, after the defense failed to provide evidence exonerating their client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dinah's murder. He subsequently received his third life sentence. On November 22, 2007, it was reported that Tobin had been attacked by fellow inmates. He sustained minor injuries. Shortly before this incident, the serial killer had confessed to a total of 11 murders. Recently, on October 8, 2022, Peter passed away in the hospital. In 1967, 20-year-old Susan Galvin was a recent transplant from her hometown of Spokane, Washington to Seattle. She had been living in the city for just about a year and had a job with the Seattle Police Department working the graveyard shift as a records clerk. On July 9th, however, Susan failed to show up for work. Susan's body was discovered in an elevator in a parking garage off of Mercer Street. She had been raped and strangled. The parking garage was located at the Seattle Center, a 74-acre tourism and entertainment area originally constructed for the 1962 World's Fair and home to Seattle's famous Space Needle. Susan was known to spend a lot of her free time around the center. Police hypothesized that she had been in the parking garage because she was about to leave and go to work when she was attacked. Police dusted for fingerprints, canvassed the area, and interviewed dozens of people as part of their investigation. They were only ever able to identify one real suspect, a professional clown named Punchy. Susan had been seen with Punchy a few hours prior to her death in the area of the Seattle Center currently known as the Armory. There are also reports that she had been seen with him a few days before 9th as well. Punchy had also quit his job just a few days after Susan was killed. The clown was never charged, however, due to a lack of evidence. Susan's case went cold, but efforts were made to solve it over the years as new technology emerged. In 2002, the clothes Susan had been wearing at the time of her murder, which were still preserved in evidence, were re-examined in hopes of finding new evidence. The effort resulted in the discovery of DNA evidence on the clothing. Unfortunately, there were no matches to the DNA profile in any police database. The DNA did answer one lingering question in the case, however. In 2016, the case was reassigned to Seattle Police Detective Ralph Norton. Detective Norton was able to track down the man who had worked as Punchy the Clown, who was then living in Utah. He provided a DNA sample to the police. His DNA was not a match to the profile discovered on Susan's clothing, and he was finally clear of suspicion in the murder. The arrest of Joseph James D'Angelo, the alleged Golden State Killer, gave Detective Norton new hope of using the so far unidentified DNA to catch Susan's killer. In the summer of 2018, he sent the DNA to Parbon Nanolabs in Virginia to use genetic genealogy to try to identify a suspect in the case. Genetic genealogist Cece Moore uploaded the profile to GEDmatch, an open-source genetic genealogy database, and discovered several very distant relatives of the killer. There were 2 distant cousins amongst them that she found to be the killer's closest relatives in the database, sharing just 2% of their DNA with him. Moore then began the process of building these individuals' family trees. She discovered the most recent common ancestors that the 2 individuals she found in GEDmatch shared with the contributor of the DNA at the crime scene. A couple comprised of a man born in Kentucky in 1828 and a woman born in Missouri in 1837. Using public records to trace their descendants through the decades, Moore eventually identified a suspect from Seattle. By the time he was identified, this suspect had already passed away. Seattle police contacted his family and obtained a DNA sample from one of his relatives to confirm that they shared a familial relationship with the suspect. When those results confirmed that the police were looking at the right family, they received permission to exhume the potential suspect's body. The exhumation from a graveyard in Tukwila, Washington occurred in early 2019. DNA extracted from the exhumed bones confirmed that the suspect's DNA matched that found on Susan's clothing. Susan's case then became the oldest case ever solved by the use of genetic genealogy so far. On May 7, 2019, just 2 months shy of the 52nd anniversary of Susan's murder, the Seattle Police Department held a press conference during which Detective Norton announced that Susan's killer was a man named Frank Whippich. In 1967, Whippich had been a 26-year-old married father of 1. He and his wife had a second child 2 years later, and then divorced in 1971. He worked as a security guard, and while he may have worked security at the Seattle Center at the time of the murder, this has not been confirmed. His only criminal conviction for larceny occurred the same year he and his wife divorced, and he served 9 months in prison in relation to it. Whippich was arrested one more time for a weapons offense in 1975. Seattle police have since lost the records for this arrest, but according to Whippich's family, it stemmed from him impersonating a police officer. He would make traffic stops dressed in a uniform armed with a gun. He did not serve time in prison in connection with this arrest. Whippich died in 1987 due to complications from diabetes. His family, including his children, cooperated with the police during the investigation into Susan's murder despite their shock at Frank's involvement with the case. Whippich had served in the Army in the early 1960s and had been stationed in Germany, New York, and Alaska. Investigators are now looking into unsolved cases in those areas from the times Whippich had been in each one of them to see if he may have been involved in any of those crimes as well. None of the original detectives on Susan's case were still alive to see it solved, but Detective Norton attributes his ability to solve the case with new technology to their efforts in 1967. Having a viable DNA sample that has not degraded to the point of being unusable after so much time is very rare. The DNA in this case only remained because of the professionalism and attention to detail shown by the original detectives in their collection and proper storage of the evidence at the time of the murder. The case is considered solved by the Seattle police, and according to Detective Norton, in his own words, Frank Whippich is 100% certain to be the murderer of Susan Galvin. However, the fact that Frank Whippich is deceased technically leaves the case in limbo. While the case is solved with the identification of Whippich as the killer, Whippich is still innocent of the crime. Since he cannot be given the opportunity to defend himself at trial, and he cannot be convicted in a court of law, he must be considered innocent. While this is an important legal distinction, Whippich's identification is still significant to Detective Norton. We're not able to punish him with incarceration, but history will hold him accountable. Norton told Cairo 7 News, "We know he is the murderer of Susan Galvin, and that will be his defining characteristic. While the discovery of Whippach's identity will not result in any criminal charges, it does at least answer some of the questions that have haunted Susan's family, including her 7 siblings for the past 52 years. Seattle Police Chief Carmen Best presented Chris Galvin, who had just been 6 years old at the time of his older sister's death, with the American flag that had been flying over the Seattle Justice Center the day Susan's case was solved at the news conference announcing the resolution to the case. Another one of Susan's brothers, Larry Galvin, sent a statement to the conference from his home in Florida. 52 years later, we learn the who, but still have no clear understanding as to the why Larry wrote. There will always be that lingering question. On May 25, 2009, an emergency call was to the services in Portland, USA, reporting a fire. When the fire was extinguished and firefighters the building, they discovered a horrifying scene. The room was surrounded by crosses and other religious objects. There lay a completely charred body. However, the most terrifying part was that the corpse was headless. Zoe Siraki was born on March 25, 1991 in Portland, located in Cumberland County, Maine, in the northwestern United States. She grew up with her loving parents John and Linda Siraki, her older brother Gregory, and 2 half-sisters from her father's side. Zoe always maintained good relationships with them. John Siraki was a builder, and thanks to his job, he supported the family well. From an early age, Zoe was surrounded by creative stimuli and showed a strong inclination towards art. She also loved animals and had 5 cats at home. As Zoe grew older, she became increasingly restless and curious. The idea of traveling and experiencing other cultures fascinated her. She also started following a vegan diet, consuming only vegetables while avoiding meat and animal products. This lifestyle included an ecological culture of protecting animals, the environment, and health. In 2005, Zoe started attending high school, where she had a large group of friends who described her as a happy, joyful, and positive girl. In 2008, on her 17th birthday, Zoe surprised everyone with a decision that her parents did not like. She dropped out of school. Ken Coonan, the principal of the school Zoe attended, said that the girl refused to talk and discuss why she did not want to finish her junior year. Ken remembered Zoe as very nice, and, according to him, her classmates spoke highly of her. He added that she interacted a lot with other energetic and creative young people like herself. A few months after Zoe dropped out of school, she began working at a local bakery and coffee shop named Bagel Works. On March 25, 2009, her 18th birthday, she eagerly awaited getting a tattoo on one of her arms. Zoe had always admired the Austrian artist Gustav Klimt's work, and when it came time to choose a tattoo design, she was inspired by his artistry. Little did she know that this decision intended to mark her transition into adulthood would introduce her to someone who would profoundly impact her future. Zoe knew exactly what she wanted on her arm, so she headed to a tattoo parlor in the Old Port area. There, she met Chad Gurney, a 27-year-old tattoo artist. They seemed to connect instantly. A few days after their initial meeting, Zoe agreed to be Chad's girlfriend. The 9-year age difference didn't bother her at all. Chad was indeed a distinctive individual. He attended high school in Wells, Maine, where he made a name for himself as a lacrosse goalie, a sport involving 2 teams using small rubber balls and long-handled sticks. After high school, Chad moved to Lynchburg, Virginia to study at Liberty University. This institution is well known for being led by the famous evangelist, Pastor Jerry Falwell. Chad's body was adorned with numerous tattoos, each telling its own story. His skin featured dozens of drawings, most depicting aliens. One particularly striking piece was a gray-toned crocodile. In the realm of tattoos, alien imagery can signify 2 things: a belief in extraterrestrial beings or a reflection of the wearer's sense of individuality, indicating they don't fit into this world but are unique and original. The reptile tattoo symbolized danger and hostility, a predator best avoided. In addition to his love for tattoos, Chad was also passionate about underground and alternative dance forms, known as hardcore dance. This genre involves intense and sometimes aggressive movements, but requires complete bodily control. It's not about self-harm. It's about releasing energy through various physical expressions like lunges, jumps, and acrobatic stunts that few dare to try. Those who knew Chad mentioned his struggle with recovering from a severe car accident 4 years prior before his move to Portland in 2005. His resilience painted him as both intriguing and complex. A man marked by his past, yet continuously moving forward towards new experiences. Chad suffered significant injuries in Alabama when the Liberty team was on their way to lacrosse game. Local van, carrying both players and coaches, was rear-ended by a car and forced into oncoming traffic where it collided with a large truck. The severe impact ejected Chad from the vehicle, leading to a near loss of his leg and necessitating approximately 20 surgeries. Due to a strong head injury, Chad underwent psychiatric evaluation, which revealed he had cognitive impairments affecting his speech, memory, and mathematical thinking. Chad gained financial independence through the 7-figure sum he received from a lawsuit following the accident. 2 years later, in 2007, he sought treatment for anxiety and depression, eventually being diagnosed with both an organic personality disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. In 2009, Chad traveled alone to Hawaii with plans to continue exploring the world. This passion for travel and curiosity about other cultures led him to meet Zoe. The couple adopted a relaxed and unconventional approach to their relationship. After they began dating, Zoe and Chad agreed on an open relationship, allowing them to see other people. In May 2009, Chad traveled again, this time for a weekend in Vancouver, Canada. Upon his return to Portland, Zoe admitted that she had been with another man during his absence and allegedly had sexual relations. Initially, it appeared that Chad was untroubled by this incident of infidelity due to their open relationship agreement. However, following this confession, Chad began insisting that Zoe quit her job and join him on a personal spiritual quest in Thailand. She declined his proposal without suspecting the grave outcome it could have. On May 25, 2009, Zoe visited Chad's apartment feeling very tired and decided to take a nap. While she was asleep, Chad grabbed her by the neck, struck her on the head, and strangled her until she ceased breathing. Then he engaged in sexual activity with Zoe's lifeless body before decapitating her, according to records. After committing the heinous crime, Chad took a shower, got dressed, and drove to the nearest gas station, where he filled a canister with gasoline. He returned to his apartment and doused Zoe's body on the lower floor with gasoline, laying a trail to the front door before igniting the fire. Chad took a backpack he had packed for a trip to Thailand, along with a laptop and shotgun. When the apartment caught fire, he went to an ATM, withdrew cash, and checked into the Old Orchard Beach Motel. There, he got into a jacuzzi and waited. Meanwhile, a call was made to 911 emergency services about the fire. Authorities responded immediately and were able to extinguish the flames. Upon entering the building, they were confronted with a horrific scene. Among the ashes lay a charred corpse, surrounded by crosses and other religious items. A neighbor quickly called Chad to inform him that his house had burned down. The young man replied that he wasn't in town, as he had gone to his hometown of Lewiston, and then quickly hung up the phone. On Tuesday, May 26th, Chad spoke with his best friend and confessed that he had killed Zoe. While explaining what happened, he seemed calm and rational. Chad said he was tired of the pain and couldn't restrain himself anymore. As he talked to his friend, he drove through the streets of Portland and carelessly ran a red light. A nearby city police officer stopped him. Chad insisted that his friend explain over the phone to the officer who had pulled him over that Chad had been in an accident in 2005, which might have caused mental health issues. After this interaction with the officer and talking to his friend, Chad went to the police and confessed to Zoe's murder. The police confiscated Chad's belongings, and on his computer's hard drive, a computer crimes investigator found a video recording labeled woman half decapitated for suspected infidelity. At least if she cheated, she won't do it again. This evidence was later admitted in court on Wednesday, May 27th. At the high school where Zoe had studied, her memory was honored with a moment of silence during classes. Teachers and students were informed about the incident during lunch. That same day, a room was set up in the school, where social workers and counselors were available for grieving students. After some time, Christine Koo, Zoe's stepsister, made the first statement on behalf of the family. She told local media journalists that she wanted the public to know this was an unusual murder because Chad had committed many evil acts. According to Christine, detectives told her that in a rage, Chad had attacked Zoe, sexually violated her body, and set it on fire. Then he calmly went to a motel and got into a jacuzzi. A week after Zoe's murder, on Tuesday, June 2, 2009, a vigil was held in front of the apartment building where Chad had lived. It was a moment of consolation for Zoe's friends and family. Many strangers shocked and outraged by the brutal crime also attended. Estimates suggest that over 150 people gathered to pray and remember Zoe. They also placed candles and flowers on the steps of the building, where her life was tragically cut short. Zoe's father Jane and her stepsister Courtney came to the scene of the tragedy and were touched by the support of so many people. Meanwhile, the police began interviewing Chad's friends and acquaintances, who agreed that the young man had a split personality. According to them, he sometimes portrayed himself as a person on a spiritual quest, with religious artifacts throughout his apartment and plans to travel to Thailand to study Eastern religions. Some said that Chad was kind and charming, often giving people small gifts. They mentioned that he often spoke of wanting to use money he received from an accident for the good of humanity. At the same time, Chad enjoyed his image as a tough guy, with tattoos covering his arms and provocative confrontational behavior. Robert Collins, a 24-year-old chef, noticed something peculiar about Chad. When Chad attended parties, people often shrugged and turned away. Robert recalled Chad once confiding in him that the only thing he identified with was pain. He even remembered that Chad had this word tattooed on his knuckles. The police and prosecution made significant efforts to gather information about the brutal crime. Deputy Attorney General Bill Stokes reported that the judge had ordered the seizure of court documents. Steve Weir, who rented an apartment from Chad in 2006, was also questioned. He mentioned seeing religious paintings and artifacts in Chad's apartment and said Chad expressed an interest in theology but did not practice it. Watson Atkinson, owner of another tattoo parlor in Portland, shared that Chad once confessed he wanted to use his accident compensation to find himself. Watson added that Chad seemed overly focused on teenage girls. This concerned him so much that he forbade his 16-year-old daughter from interacting with Chad. Watson also noted that none of Chad's close acquaintances could have imagined how dark his thoughts were. During the initial investigation, Chad's prior medical history and mental health diagnoses were revealed. However, while in custody, several psychologists evaluated Chad and found no evidence of delusions or hallucinations. In conversations with specialists, Chad admitted having strong feelings regarding Zoe's infidelity and expressed disappointment over it. According to court documents, he claimed to be weary of the infidelity of all his girlfriends. These conversations revealed a depressed individual who began contemplating taking Zoe's life after she confessed her unfaithfulness to him. Chad told 3 different psychologists that he engaged in sexual acts with her remains because he believed he had already committed terrible act and was contemplating what worst thing he could do next. When his trial began, a 127-minute police interrogation conducted 12 hours after the crime was leaked. During the interrogation with Detective Danham, Chad said that he and Zoe got along very well. He noted that she occasionally stayed in his apartment for about a week and that they had no arguments. Chad claimed they were soulmates and that she always tried to be honest with him. He stated that he had taken the life of the most beautiful girl he ever knew and added that he owed it to his 18-year-old victim to tell the truth. During the conversation with the detective, Chad remained composed, constantly apologized, and cried several times. Chad recounted that on May 25, 2009, Zoe was napping. According to him, he approached and began to strangle her. She tried to fight for her life and screamed for him to stop. Chad said that when Zoe tried to resist, he hit her on the head and continued to strangle her until she stopped breathing. He then described the atrocities he committed with her body. At this point in the interrogation, Chad stated that he used 3 knives, not a samurai sword as initially thought, for the decapitation. He added that he then placed a cross between her legs and talked about everything he did while her body burned in the apartment. Describing the events, Chad constantly called himself a terrible person. When asked why he decapitated Zoe, he replied that he was trying to turn her death into a ritual of forgiveness. When asked why he did it, Chad struggled to find an answer. He then stated that he felt possessed, and that on the day of Zoe's murder, everything in his life dimmed. He explained that for several hours, he became a wild, primitive beast in his basic instincts, and that's why he committed such a monstrous act. This interrogation became an important piece of evidence presented in Cumberland County Supreme Court during the initial hearings. Prosecutors played the entire 2.5-hour recording for Judge Roland Cole. There was discussion that Chad faced a minimum of 25 years in prison and a maximum of life imprisonment. During one of the hearings in 2011, it was proposed that acknowledging his mental disorder could result in his transfer to a psychiatric center in Austria. It was established that the accused had strangled the victim in a fit of anger. However, it remained uncertain whether Chad, who waived his right to a jury trial, agreed with this at the time. Proust argued that the former Liberty University student and lacrosse champion was fully aware of his actions. They brought in a psychiatrist and psychologist to testify about Chad's mental state. All of them concluded that the young man knew what he was doing and understood his decision to brutally kill his girlfriend. The defense, however, continued to emphasize Chad's mental health issues, arguing that he was ashamed and afraid of losing control over himself. On January 11, 2012, Chad's attorney tried to convince the Supreme Court to dismiss evidence found on his client's personal computer at the time of arrest. This evidence included a gruesome video where Chad explained how to decapitate an unfaithful woman. The defense contended that this video should not have been admitted into evidence. In March 2012, nearly 3 years after the egregious crime, 30-year-old Chad Gurney was sentenced to 50 years for the murder of Zoe Siraki and 25 years for arson. The judge ordered these sentences be served consecutively. Chad's lawyers filed an appeal against the sentence, but it was rejected. Zoe's family had hoped for a life sentence. During sentencing, the presiding judge stated it was clear that the defendant did not perceive reality normally. However, the issue was whether he understood his actions were wrong. Sarah Churchill, Chad's attorney, argued before the Supreme Court that brain concussions and other injuries from a 2005 accident left her client in a constant state of delusion. She claimed the judge erred by finding Chad guilty because the search warrant should not have extended to his smartphone, laptop, and social media pages. Churchill argued that instead of considering evidence from these devices, significant weight should have been given to evidence regarding Chad's psychosis and alienation at the time of the crime. The Deputy Attorney General countered by stating that Chad killed Zoe in retaliation for her infidelity, which he deemed dishonored as betrayal. The deputy noted that no information from social networks was used against Chad and concluded there was overwhelming evidence proving he knew what he did during the crime. Afterward, Zoe's Aunt Kathy Kozoff told journalists she felt breathless seeing and hearing him during trial, recalling her niece's agonizing final moments vividly. Annie Tan, a 24-year-old young mother, vanished mysterious circumstances. According to her partner, she abruptly left him and their newborn daughter without any explanation for her departure. The search for Annie extended over 4 years, with ongoing efforts to locate her, but no immediate results. Annie Tan, born on May 1, 1965, was raised by her mother. She had a love for, enjoyed dancing and fun activities, and cherished simple joys. Annie always dreamed of having a large family and saw motherhood as her primary goal in life. She embraced this role early, welcoming her first son Jimmy at the age of 18, and then her second son Sean just a year later. By the age of 20, she had also given birth to her third child, a daughter named Shane. Tragically, shortly after Shane's birth, the children's father decided not to participate in their upbringing and left the family. This abandonment left Annie facing the challenges of being a single parent to 3 young children while living in a rented apartment in Maine. In 1987, when Shane was just 6 months old and Annie was 22 years old, she met Michael Palin. He was a 32-year-old Navy petty officer, serving on the aircraft carrier Bramby. Their paths crossed in Portland, Maine, where Michael's ship was docked. Michael quickly became taken with Annie during an encounter at the waterfront. Living in Charleston, South Carolina, Michael was highly respected in the Navy for his work as a computer systems operator. He actively participated in military operations and had been recognized with several awards. Annie found herself deeply attracted to Michael's naval career and soon fell in love with him. She confided to a friend that she believed she had found a man worthy of her love. After dating for several months and developing their relationship further, Annie and Michael decided to live together as a family unit, along with her 2 sons and daughter. However, their shared life took an unfortunate turn when a fire broke out in their apartment. At that time, Annie wasn't home. Michael was alone with the children. While Michael managed to escape along with Jimmy and Sean, who could walk, Shane, being too young, sadly didn't make it out alive. After returning, Annie tried to go back into the burning apartment to rescue Shane. However, neighbors restrained her. The loss of Shane due to the fire left a significant impact on Annie. She shared that this tragic event created an irreplaceable void in her heart. As authorities started investigating the fire, experts faced difficulties in determining the exact cause of ignition. The circumstances were highly suspicious to investigators. Even with these suspicions, the investigation concluded without assigning responsibility to any individual. Following the devastating fire, Annie Tayan moved with her sons to her mother's residence in Portland. Meanwhile, Michael Palin immersed himself in work and chose to live in the barracks. A few months later, another alarming incident happened near Annie's mother's house. A shed in the backyard caught fire. Investigators quickly identified the fire's origin and discovered a lighter engraved with Bramby, the name of Michael Palin's ship. This evidence pointed toward Michael as a prime suspect. Despite this suggestive evidence, police couldn't conclusively prove his involvement because of insufficient proof. After this second fire incident, child welfare authorities in Maine determined that Annie Tayan's sons were in a potentially dangerous situation under her care. Consequently, they decided to remove Jamie and Sean from their mother's custody and place them under foster care administered by social services. This decision left Annie devastated, as she fervently tried to regain custody of her children. Despite all her efforts, she couldn't do so, inflicting profound emotional distress and leaving her heartbroken over being separated from her sons. When Michael's ship returned to Charleston, South Carolina, he rented an apartment and reconnected with Annie, despite their tumultuous past. Annie agreed to communicate with him and eventually moved in with him to Goose Creek, a suburb of Charleston, where they lived as a couple. However, Annie's stay was soon marred by a startling discovery. She found a photograph of Michael wearing a wedding ring, revealing his marital status. Confronted with the photograph, Michael admitted to Annie that he was married, but had been long divorced. He disclosed that his ex-wife Dawn Breeze and their 3 children resided in his mother's house in Savannah, Georgia. Despite Michael's reassurances of no ongoing relationship with Dawn, Annie was shaken by the revelation. She contemplated leaving him, but ultimately decided to stay, still seeing Michael as an ideal partner for starting a family. Their cohabitation, however, soon turned sour. Michael's behavior towards Annie grew increasingly hostile and demeaning. Annie, planning to return to her mother's house, discovered she was pregnant. This news led her to reconsider her plans to leave, filled with the joy of expecting another child. In October 1989, a month before her disappearance, Annie gave birth to her 4th daughter, Jade. Though Annie knew Jade could never replace her lost daughter, she felt Jade filled a significant void in her heart. Yet in the month following Jade's birth, Michael's treatment of Annie deteriorated further. He resorted to openly insulting and humiliating her. Annie confided in a friend about her fear of Michael's relentless pursuit if she attempted to flee. Michael's controlling behavior escalated. He confined Annie to their apartment while he was at work, disconnecting the phone and placing it in his briefcase. Annie was increasingly alarmed by Michael's actions. Just 2 days before her vanishing act, in a state of distress, Annie reached out to a close friend, Katie French, via phone call. In the call, Annie revealed to Katie that she had disclosed her intention to leave Michael. However, Michael had retorted that if she left, their daughter Jade would remain with him. Annie found herself in a desperate situation, overwhelmed with emotion. She urgently pleaded with Katie to come immediately and rescue both her and her daughter Jade. Unfortunately, Katie was preoccupied and could not come to her aid. Instead, she sent Annie money for a bus ticket, hoping it would enable her to escape and return to Portland. Unbeknownst to them, this heartfelt conversation would be their last exchange. 2 days later, on November 7, 1989, Katie attempted to contact Annie, but received no response. Several days passed before Michael Palin informed Katie that on November 6th, Annie had gathered her belongings and departed in an unknown direction. Expecting Annie to reach out from her new location, Katie waited anxiously. However, 2 weeks went by with no word. By Thanksgiving on November 24th, Annie had been unreachable for 20 days. Growing increasingly concerned, Katie contacted all of Annie's friends and acquaintances, but found that no one had any information about her whereabouts. She then tried to report 24-year-old Annie as missing to the police, but was informed that she could not file an official report since she was not a blood relative. Months passed without any sign of Annie. Eventually, Katie obtained the phone number of Michael Palin's mother. Upon contacting her, Katie was shocked to learn that Jade was in her care. This revelation confirmed Katie's worst fears. She knew Annie would never leave her daughter behind willingly. Despite the concerning developments, Michael Palin displayed a notable lack of concern regarding Annie's disappearance. He made no apparent efforts to engage with law enforcement or initiate a search for her whereabouts, and soon received a transfer to the naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. Months following Annie's disappearance, the search for her was finally launched after a report from her mother prompted official action. The initial focus of the investigation was her live-in partner, Michael Palin, who quickly emerged as the primary suspect. Michael detailed that on the morning of November 6th, he had woken to find Annie gone, having left their daughter in his care. He recounted that the previous night, Annie had expressed a desire to end their relationship. Michael did not attempt to find Annie, believing that their relationship had conclusively ended and further communication was unnecessary. He also claimed to be unaware of her being reported missing or of her lack of contact with family and friends. Upon inspecting the couple's rented apartment, police found no evidence, such as traces, clues, or suspicious items, that could provide leads in the case. Annie Tan's case seemed to have hit a dead end with no large-scale search initiated for the young woman. Her whereabouts, whether she was still alive, and the potential motives of any abductor remained mysteries. The only certain detail was that the last person reported to have seen her was her live-in partner, Michael. For an arduous span of 4 years, there was no news or sightings of Annie. Katie French, her close friend, remained the sole active seeker, tirelessly cooperating with the investigation. Katie invested approximately $16,000 in phone bills alone, employed a private detective, and was steadfast in her determination to continue the search. She reached out to various organizations that could potentially provide insight into Michael Palin's background. Katie personally held a strong belief that Michael was a dangerous individual and should not be trusted. She harbored a deep fear of him, aware that if Michael became aware of her involvement with the police, it could potentially put her in harm's way. In 1993, a significant development occurred in Annie Tan's case as it was transferred to the Naval Criminal Service, marking a pivotal shift in the investigation. The NCIS agents initiated a comprehensive re-examination of the case starting from scratch. They found Michael Palin at the naval base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. When police agents approached him to discuss Annie Tan's disappearance, Michael said he would only talk if his was present. Later, he stopped cooperating altogether. He refused to give any more help or information. The Marine police gathered all the details they could about missing Annie. They then reached out to South Carolina law enforcement. They asked them to check their records for any unidentified bodies, noting that Annie had given birth a month before she went missing. The South Carolina police shared a case about a deceased woman who also gave birth just a month before her death. They provided a sketch of this woman's face, which shocked the Marine police agents when they saw it. They were sure they'd found Annie. The scene revealed a violent murder. Her body was found beside a high and her skull was broken into 124 pieces, and her skull was broken into 124 pieces, requiring nearly 500 hours of careful work to reconstruct it. Annie's body had been put in a naval bag soaked in gasoline and set on fire. The burning bag was found at 6 a.m. on November 7, 1989, the same time Katie French noticed Annie stopped answering her calls. A match of dental records confirmed the woman's identity as Annie Tayan. With this discovery, Michael Palin became the prime suspect in her murder right away. Marine police agents set up a detailed investigation plan, which started with examining his financial activities closely. On the day Annie vanished, investigators found that Michael made a credit card purchase about 25 miles south of where her char remains were found. Digging into his phone records, they discovered that on the Lungoza of November 6th, he had made 2 calls to his mother's house in Savannah. The first call was at 4:35 a.m. and the second one at 5:17 a.m. With this evidence, agents hypothesized that Michael may have killed Annie in their apartment, then moved her body to the roadside, where he set it on fire. To push forward with the investigation, NCIS agents aimed to find Michael Palin's ex-wife, Dawn Breeze. At the time of Annie's death, Dawn was still married to Michael and living at his mother's house in Savannah. After Annie disappeared, Dawn divorced Michael and started moving around a lot, living in different states as if she were avoiding something or someone. Eventually, agents tracked her down in Miami, Florida, during the summer of 1995. That was almost 6 years after Annie had been murdered. At this point, Dawn had become involved with spiritual practices for income. When agents contacted her at work to discuss Annie's disappearance, her calm response was surprising. She even asked how long they'd talk, because she wanted to know if she'd have time to eat. Her reaction wasn't what the agents expected. They thought she'd be more emotional when talking about Annie. Despite being calm during their interaction, inconsistencies began appearing during a lengthy 10-hour interrogation. Initially, Dawn's story matched Michael Palin's version. She said Michael told her that his mistress had left, and that he planned to raise their daughter by himself when she visited his apartment. However, inconsistencies emerged regarding when exactly she visited Michael's apartment. At one point during the questioning, Dawn became silent for a moment and looked down, before expressing a wish to tell the truth. In a surprisingly emotionless manner, without any tears, she proceeded to share information she had kept hidden for 6 years. Dawn recounted that early one morning, Michael urgently summoned her to his Charleston apartment. Upon arrival, Dawn discovered Annie Tayan's lifeless body on the living room floor. Michael donned to go to the bedroom to meet his daughter. At that time, Dawn and Michael were still legally married and shared 3 children. Michael confessed his affair with Annie to Dawn, explaining that it had led to the birth of a daughter. He pleaded with her to accept the child and assist him in raising her. According to Dawn, Michael, unwilling to engage in a custody battle with Annie, opted for murder as a more straightforward solution. On the night transitioning from November 5th to 6th, 1989, Michael and Annie went to bed. After a moment of intimacy, Annie fell asleep. It was then that Michael took a crowbar and began to strike her viciously. Tragically, their daughter Jade was lying next to Annie on the bed throughout this horrific act. Michael relentlessly hit Annie on the head, each blow more brutal than the last. Despite her strength, Annie eventually succumbed to her injuries right there in the bed. In a chilling turn of events, Michael reached out to his wife Dawn, requesting her urgent presence. He then placed Annie's body in a naval bag and transferred it to the trunk of his car, where he had also stored a canister of gasoline. He positioned both his wife and daughter in the car's back seat before embarking on a lengthy drive of approximately 100 miles. Upon finding a secluded spot by the roadside, Michael removed Annie's body from the trunk, drenched it in gasoline, and set it ablaze. After ensuring that the fire had taken hold, he hurriedly returned to the car and drove Dawn and Jade back to his mother's house in Savannah. Dawn Breeze's revelation provided a pivotal turn in the investigation, marking the first substantial evidence since the discovery of Annie's remains. The investigators then requested Dawn make a monitored phone call to her ex-husband Michael, discussing Annie Tahan's murder. She consented and contacted him accordingly. Michael indicated the need for a serious conversation, as Annie's body had been located and identified. Michael's response, "No, they didn't do that," suddenly confirmed to the agents the veracity of Dawn's account. In the call, Dawn also informed Michael that blood had been detected in their former apartment, and the NCIS suspected them of involvement in the murder. She urged Michael to devise an explanation for the blood found in the apartment. Michael's reply, "Okay, we need to work together and come up with something," did not include any direct admissions, yet his demeanor suggested a clear understanding of the context of their discussion. He refrained from asking unnecessary questions or offering denials, implying his awareness of the situation. This interaction solidified the theory that Tayan had been murdered in Michael's apartment. Towards the end of their conversation, Michael advised Dawn to be cautious with her phone communications, insisting they would collaboratively manage the situation. NCIS agents took Dawn Breeze to the crime scene to unearth any remaining evidence. To protect her identity and ensure her safety as a cooperating witness, they disguised her before the visit. At the apartment, Dawn meticulously recounted and demonstrated the positioning of Annie's body and sequence of events. She pointed out an area near a wall and baseboard where there had been a significant accumulation of blood, affecting both carpet and concrete floor beneath it. Since Michael had vacated the apartment, landlords had replaced and cleaned carpets multiple times, explaining absence of visible traces. However, when police applied a special chemical to concrete floor, a large purple stain appeared indicative of protein presence, aligning with Dawn's account where Annie's body had lain. Despite blood seeping into concrete, NCIS faced challenges in conclusively proving substance to be blood. Consequently, search for additional physical evidence to be blood. Continued. Dawn also mentioned a nightstand with television near bed, where Annie was killed. According to her, television had been splattered with blood during murder, and Michael mentioned its need for extensive cleaning due to stains. He later disposed of television, possibly selling rather than discarding it. Michael's pursuit of a functional appliance, considering his frugal nature, felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. Despite this, the agents were resolute in their efforts to locate it. By this point, Michael Palin had become aware of the NCIS surveillance, especially after a phone call with his ex-wife Dawn. This realization triggered paranoia, making him acutely conscious of NCIS's monitoring activities. The NCIS agents were concerned that Michael might attempt to flee, coerce witnesses, or potentially inflict harm on others. In a dramatic turn of events during one surveillance mission, Michael tried to evade the authorities. However, his attempt was unsuccessful as the police swiftly caught him. Consequently, on October 11, 1995, Michael Palin was apprehended and taken into custody. While held in a military prison, under suspicion of murder, NCIS agents diligently worked to locate and interview all residents of the apartment complex where the murder took place in November 1989. Their perseverance paid off 3 months later when they encountered a neighbor who disclosed he had purchased a television from Michael. Remarkably, the television was still operational and present in his home. The police promptly seized the television and dispatched to the FBI laboratory for a thorough forensic analysis. To their significant breakthrough, the examination revealed 11 blood spots inside the speaker. These blood samples were identified as matching Annie Tayan's DNA, providing a critical piece of evidence in the ongoing murder investigation. At this stage of the case, Michael Palin's legal representatives announced his willingness to enter a guilty plea if the death penalty were set aside. Even though the prosecutor was unhappy with the way things turned out, military law required that such an agreement be made during the trial. Michael Palin admitted his guilt without showing much emotion. He wrecked the details of his crime with a detachment that was unsettling, almost like reading off a mundane list. His narrative lacked any signs of remorse or empathy. As a result, Michael Palin was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, with chance for parole after 30 years. He also received a dishonorable discharge from the Navy. Despite knowing about her husband's crime and staying silent for 6 years, Dawn Breeze avoided legal consequences due to her crucial confession to NCIS. This confession significantly helped advance the investigation. Annie's children, her sons and daughter, have been informed about their biological mother's tragic fate. they understand she did not abandon them. Jade, the daughter Annie had with Michael, has grown into a beautiful woman within the Palmer family. She has notably kept no relationship with her father. In a surprising development, Michael Palin was released from prison in 2013 after serving just 17 years due to good behavior. His exact location is currently unknown. It's advised that anyone who comes into contact with him should exercise caution. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.